Stoppers Pass podcast presented by Clutch Points. I'm your host, Blake Lovell. With me, as always, my co-host, Dillon Reagan, back here to discuss offseason in the NFL. Dillon, because as always, the Super Bowl was just played, we know, not too long ago. But hey, things don't stop in the NFL offseason. We got to start looking at what teams are going to need for the 2024 regular season, which I'm just going to say, which will be here before you know it, right? Like, it's February, but it'll be here before you know it. That's how it usually works in the NFL. But yeah, Dylan, we're going to kind of look at some of the biggest needs for the NFL's maybe top 10 Super Bowl contenders based on the odds and what they must address this offseason. So let's just go ahead and jump into it because, again, we got to get to 10 teams here. And we start with where we finished the last episode, talking about what were things going to look like for the 49ers and the Chiefs heading into next season. We mentioned, according to FanDuel, the Niners have the best odds to win the Super Bowl next year, plus 500. The Chiefs are at plus 650. So once again, the two teams that met this year, the favorites to meet once again, perhaps next year, be the winners of the Super Bowl. And so, Dylan, as we look at these teams, we talked a little bit about it in the previous episode about what they're going to need to address. But I think the Chiefs may be pretty clear what it is. Niners got a couple options to work with. So,
yeah, the Chiefs, it's got to be a receiver, right? Like, obviously, we saw them win the Super Bowl, and Rashee Rice had a great postseason, great evolution, and that's a great piece to build around. But I think we've seen how explosive this offense can be when Mahomes is paired and Kelsey are paired with an elite receiver. So for them, I mean, the offensive line held up pretty well. They had some injuries, but guys filled in great in the playoffs and then the Super Bowl in particular. The defense, there's probably some things you can tweak, but again, it's as good of a unit as they've had in Kansas City. So receiver, for me, number one, biggest need, address that. And this team just becomes even more scary. But the Niners, yeah, a little more interesting in terms of what they can do. We talked about it a bit after the Super Bowl in terms of not having that pressure opposite of Nick Bosa that they've had in previous seasons, and how that impacts the ability for teams to slide towards Bosa and chip and double team and all sorts of things. It's a numbers game, and if you have more bodies that are able to disrupt things that you can't be double teaming like that, it's going to help a lot. And then also, yeah, the offensive line, the right side of the offensive line has received a lot of criticism post Super Bowl, some moments, specific plays in particular. But I think over the course of the season, we saw that, obviously they had Trent Williams and a line that we've kind of taken for granted, but it wasn't perfect and it was a little more thin than in the past. So as much as, for the Niners, I wouldn't say their secondary is like perfect. You could maybe point to some spots, maybe another corner would be nice to have. But I think, if you're talking about, for me, what's going to actually lead to the most success for them, it's either got to be offensive line reinforcements, maybe in the interior in particular, or an edge. I think those are the two biggest ones. And maybe edges, for me, the one I'd say that would be more important.
The Ravens are number 3 on the list, plus 900 current odds to win the Super Bowl next year. For the Ravens, who, again, felt like they were in a great spot to get to the Super Bowl this year, but unfortunately came up short against the Chiefs. And now they've got a situation where, I know as you're going to note, they've got a couple different areas specifically, a couple on offense, several maybe on offense in terms of looking at kind of what their free agency, status is of several of these players. And then just sort of trying to figure out how do they build around the strengths of the team, which we know exactly what they are. But they've got some decision to make, this offseason to kind of see exactly what this roster is going to look like heading into next year. And if they can, again, be in a position to maybe be a number 1 seed in the AFC.
Yeah, it's the amount of impending free agents the Ravens have. A receiver, a corner, running back is pretty crazy. And I mentioned interior offensive line, though, as I think ultimately both their guards are hitting the market as well. It's just a team that was built so well that has, really, it's just a lot of guys that are potentially leaving. So, and their cap situation, obviously there's their actual cap space and effective cap space and what they can potentially open up are going to be very different, but they're towards the bottom. They're not in the red, at least, looking at over the cap currently, but they're right above it with a little over $5 million in cap space. There's going to be a lot of different ways they're able to open up money and keep some of these guys. But I think interior offensive line, it's obviously so important to their ability to run the ball, but at times just in that game against the Chiefs, we saw things get disrupted and how that can impact Lamar. So I think that's definitely a big one. And yeah, the Buffalo Bills, put down receiver and edge rusher. I think outside of having one more guy with Diggs would have made a huge difference. Obviously missed a big catch against the Chiefs in that divisional playoff game on a deep pass from Allen that you think could be made. And we've seen Gabe Davis step up in the playoffs, but to really see what this offense could do with a true number two, like we've seen some other teams have. I mean, imagine some of those Bengals teams with Higgins and Chase and how explosive that can be when you have a number two that, and a lot of people think is number one. But yeah, still on the defensive side, we saw that injuries kind of took a toll on this team through the course of the year, as they do everyone, but especially I'd say Buffalo's defense was impacted more than most, and also just regression with Von Miller off the field, things that kept him off the field at times as well. But I think you can make an argument that both sides have their own big need. I think you can make up for some of the defense giving up a few more points if you let Josh Allen in this offense truly take off. So maybe getting that second receiver, maybe I'm just too much on the receivers here with the Bills and Chiefs. I'm just trying to get more weapons, Blake, to Mahomes and Josh Allen. I'm thinking this like as a former Madden GM. These are the real needs that we have.
Yeah, those two guys are pretty. They're pretty hard off right now. They're in a bad way. They really need more weapons to work with in terms of their skill set for sure. Let's make sure we load up those guys with as many elite talent as we can. But no, in all seriousness, as we said, we know that's going to be a big focus. Probably for both those teams, especially the Chiefs. And again, you talked about the Ravens. You just don't know what the Ravens roster is going to look like going into next season, given all the pending free agents. So we'll see what happens there. How about them Cowboys? They're at number 5, plus 1,300 on the list right now in terms of the top Super Bowl contenders. So they're second in the NFC. They're tied with the Lions, who are at number 6. Yep. So they're both kind of in that same spot. We know the pressure's on for the Cowboys. I mean, it's that way every year, but now specifically, we felt like, it got so close to Jerry Jones making a coaching change. So now what do the Cowboys, have to do? We know what they have to do. They have to figure out exactly where they need to fill some of these gaps, maybe to make the difference, to put them ahead of the 49ers, again, or to keep them ahead of the Lions, teams like that. So, yeah, the Cowboys are certainly going to be an interesting one, but I mean, I guess we can sort of tie these two teams in together because, I mean, they do still, at least at this point, they look like probably the two biggest threats, unless we add in the Eagles, who we'll get to here in a minute, to the 49ers. But are they legitimate threats? Well, it'll just depend on if they address a couple of these needs there in Dallas and Detroit.
Yeah, I know there's some recent comments from Micah Parsons about what he thinks they need on defense, and basically was describing in his prime more of what Leighton Vander Esch had been. Obviously, things, injuries and different things have kind of overshadowed there. So, they want to keep Micah Parsons being obviously a threat on defense, not just pass rushing, but overall all over the field, and kind of takes away from his ability to be what initially when they drafted him, we thought he might be a linebacker. He's evolved to be much more than that. So linebacker on that side, we saw it at times against the Packers, and just over the course of the season where this team was getting wrecked in the running game, and maybe some reinforcements on the defensive line would help as well. But the spine there got exposed. I think of the Bills game when they went to Buffalo and James Cook went off for like 160, 70 yards, whatever it was. Obviously what Green Bay was able to do, just overall attacking Dallas's defense that had been a strength in past years and had really taken a step back. So I think, they got some good corners, some guys that maybe, Diggs should be back after his injury that cost him last season. Guys that are, might be known as more feast or famine kind of players that are going to take some risks and sometimes get burned, but often make plays. So I think linebacker, though, is a clear need, but I think there's a lot more on the offense that I'm concerned about. I mean, we saw obviously the turnover issues, but this is an offensive line that has slowly started to kind of get older. There's a chance that Tyron Smith is going to leave in free agency, right? So, I mean, that maybe is a need more so when we talk about draft approach. I think Dallas is going to be looking at some of those tackles as a potential replacement if they're not able to make it work out there. And I put running back down too. Tony Pollard, for all the, big toe, really high on him in that secondary role, but maybe just in terms of the bulk of the carries and overall workload wise, was not ready to be a number one guy necessarily. So I would say they could add a running back, but if I had to name one need, I think offensive line is still, I'm always going to kind of side with that as if I had to pick one, if they're going to lose Smith, I think finding that biggest thing, they need to make sure they shore up that offensive line and keep Dak protected. And then, with Detroit, you can't. It's hard to say that you're anything on offense. Maybe there's little pieces of the offense that you'd want to nitpick, but honestly, obviously the biggest needs are on the other side of the ball. A defense that was pretty leaky in the secondary. So cornerback, I mean, this was some of these, obviously talking about multiple positions, and there are other needs you could argue for Detroit, same as we talk about San Francisco needing a pass rusher opposite of Nick Bosa. You could say the same thing with Aiden Hutchinson here. I wouldn't say the linebacking corps are phenomenal, maybe more solid, but yeah, the secondary is probably the biggest leaky spot for them. So I think finding a true number one corner, or even a solid high end number two, would go a long way to helping reinforce this defense. And you don't have to be perfect on defense if you're Detroit with an offense like they have, but if you can push towards the top half of the league and into the top 10 potentially, now we're talking about a really dangerous team in terms of what you mentioned. Obviously, they almost just beat the Niners this year, and no reason to think they won't be a big threat again in 2024. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. One of the relationships I'm proudest of is with my older brother. He taught me how to put others before myself, which has not only strengthened our own relationship, but relationships throughout my life. A common misconception about relationships is that they have to be easy to be right. But that's not true at all. The best relationships are the ones where both parties put in the work to make it great. Oftentimes, we have a hard time navigating tough moments, and that's perfectly fine. Good news is that we have access to therapy as a safe space to work through the challenges we face in all of our relationships. Relationships can be compared to football in many ways. Both involve teamwork, communication, strategy, and goals. Just like a football team needs to practice and train together, working on relationship skills and habits can make all of the difference. Sometimes a coach or a therapist can help them improve their performance and overcome challenges. They can also provide feedback, encouragement, and guidance. Therapy is not a sign of weakness or failure, but a way of enhancing and strengthening the bond between partners, friends, or family members. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, convenient, and very accessible. Become your own soulmate, whether you're looking for one or not. Visit BetterHelp.com/thepass today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/thepass.
Well, defense is the theme of the next two teams, too, and these are two teams that kind of felt like they have gotten to similar spots. They both got to a Super Bowl recently, come up short, and now are trying to kind of find their way back and navigate, to get above some of these other teams that have maybe eclipsed them, like we said, in the NFC, a team like the Lions, the AFC, given what, obviously the Chiefs are still doing, the Ravens, the Bills. And the two teams we're talking about are the Bengals, plus 1,500 on FanDuel right now to win the Super Bowl next year. Eagles, plus 1,700. And again, Dylan, it feels like defense is probably a theme for both of these two teams. Definitely going to be one of the areas that they address for sure. I think when you just look at it overall, but yeah, like it's always the hardest part, right? We say teams that get to the Super Bowl, you come up short, and then it's trying to get back there. It's never easy to do. And now these two teams feel like they've, obviously injuries have played a factor, certainly and such for the Bengals last year and all that, but the Eagles just completely went in the direction we did not think they were going to go in. And so, yeah, these are two teams looking to kind of be on the comeback trail entering 2024.
Yeah, Philadelphia, obviously, real quick on them. I mean, just I'm sure if you talk to any number of Eagles fans, they're going to get very different ideas of what they think the biggest needs are. It was a kind of a whole kind of fall apart overall. But you look at some of the talking about guys that have been in the league dominant for a long time, like Lane Johnson, obviously Kelsey retiring. It's an offensive line that we taken, maybe have been taken for granted as being so good and that they're just going to find the next guy. And sometimes it's not so easy to do that. So I kind of mentioned that one in there, but it's hard to say that the defense, like you said, isn't more impactful. You could say that they need a number two corner. We could go back to what they looked like when they made the Super Bowl, and they had some savvy free agency additions that they'd made that year that were 1 year rentals, essentially, that as soon as they were gone, got exposed. But I think the interior, the spine of the defense, the linebacker and safety, maybe safety a bit more, in my opinion. These are really big needs that, it got to get better. It got over the course of the year. You can maybe say like at maybe past years too, they've had a little more depth overall in the defensive front seven overall. That's allowed defensive linemen not to have so many snaps that they got criticized, from the local media and fans for some of the defensive linemen in particular having way too many snaps early in the year. By midseason, late season, these guys were just spent. But I think beyond that, the safety, it was just real bad at times. And the team started just over and over attacking the middle of the field in the deep middle third. So you can make either of those arguments. But yeah, the Bengals obviously didn't have Burrow for most of the season, and even they did struggle early in the year when he was healthy. And offensive line is always going to be one of the things we mentioned, but I think defensive tackle, especially DJ Reader, potentially leaving free agency. They weren't he got injured, tore his quad late in the season. So we'll see if they bring him back. There are a number of free agents, defensive tackles that are going to be on the market. We talked about the Ravens for a sec. We didn't even mention defensive tackle, but Madubuike is going to hit the market. That's I know ESPN's Matt Bowen mentioned in terms of a best fit the Bengals, and he does fit that billing. But you might need a couple guys, honestly, to fill in the middle there. They have some solid pass rushers, but guys that aren't always the most consistent with what Hubbard and Hendrickson have done at times. So I think defensive tackle, if I had to say, for the Bengals defense, just so pivotal to being able to stop the run, to let the secondary and Lou be kind of more creative on the back end with the coverages. So I'd say that's probably their biggest need, in my opinion, is defensive tackle.
All right, then we round out the top 10 with these two teams who are trying to look to sort of emerge into actual title contenders. That is the Dolphins plus 2,100, the Packers plus 2,200. Of course, we saw the Packers, kind of pull off the upset. We thought they may do it twice in the playoffs this year. Feel like they're certainly much further along than maybe we expect them to be at this point with the way they finished the season. Then the Dolphins, who, again, were kind of one of those teams that were at times hard to figure out. Initially you thought, wow, they're just steamrolling some people. Maybe they have a chance to be the team to beat in the AFC. Didn't happen. And so curious to see what the needs are going to be and how they address them to figure out how they're going to eclipse maybe all these teams that also feel like that maybe they're a little bit ahead right now in terms of their rosters.
Yeah, I think for the Dolphins, there's some needs on defense. I think health is obviously going to play a big part. They have some star power in their secondary and other spots. I think outside of, we'll see what happens along the defensive line and who they're able to help, how quickly Phillips comes back. You kind of had a revelation with him before his tear. I forget if it was an ACL or Achilles against the Jets, but I'd say the biggest and most important thing for any Mike McDaniel and Shanahan attack, but especially with what we've seen with Tua in particular, is the interior of the offensive line. When the pocket is crumbling in the middle, this is the case for the vast majority of quarterbacks in the league, interior pressure causes all sorts of issues. And I think that shoring that up, they had some injuries there, but overall just became too overwhelming. And obviously the conditions played a part in that playoff loss to the Chiefs. But I think the interior offensive line there, if I had to say one need, that's kind of where I'd pinpoint it, even if there are some other question marks that you can point to. And then, the Packers, like you said, man, they really came on strong late in the season. Easily could have made it to the Super Bowl, or at least the NFC Championship. Were right there in that Niners game. They do have, I believe, all their safeties hitting the free agent market. So put safety down as a big need. Offensive line's been mentioned, but this organization is, in terms of developing and drafting consistent depth at offensive line, is something that a lot of teams should take note of. A lot of younger receivers, but guys that were stepping up over the course of the year. So it's hard for me to look at offense, and maybe you could say running back, depending on the health of Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon long term. Maybe they could use a reinforcement there, but I think that side's pretty good. I think just shoring up the defense a bit. It's been I know they've invested a lot of money in it. Maybe you could say corner as well. I mean, there's some needs there, but the front part of the front four and the defense and overall, it started really coming together, and it's a really exciting young group. I'll talk about the Packers a lot this offseason, but if you're a Packers fan, it's a good time, man. This turnaround's happened again, and poor Bears fans we'll be talking about the Bears a lot soon. But I think the Packers were a good one to round out this list. The Texans and Rams, I think, were the next two. But this is pretty sound top 10, even if maybe the Bengals, we'll see how they all fit in there. But Green Bay, man, scary team for the Lions and the Niners and the whole NFC, in my opinion.
Yeah, sorry, Bears fans. We'll talk more about you, but it won't be in the Super Bowl contenders list right now. We'll see how your picks go in the offseason, and then we'll see how it goes. But as you said, we will talk more about the Bears and all these other teams in the offseason as we look at the needs they need to address moving forward, not just for the likely Super Bowl contenders, but also everyone else as well. Dylan, I know a lot of offseason stuff already going up over at Clutch Points, so everybody know where they can find all that.
You can go to the NFL section of the Clutch Points app or the NFL section of ClutchPoints.com. Lots of early draft stuff, but a lot of focus on free agency here. I think we're only about 3 weeks out from the start of NFL free agency. So looking at all same kind of thing we're talking about here, biggest needs, best destinations for certain free agents every team should target, all that good stuff you can find in the NFL section of Clutch Points.
Yep, check it all out there. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for Establish the Pass. And thanks as always for listening to the podcast. And we'll talk to you next time here on the Establish the Pass podcast.